Hey guys, my name is Amber, and I chose to focus on the components of moral action. It's chapter 6 of Johnson, which is called Decision Making and Behavior. And if you guys want to follow along, I focused on pages 189 to 200. James Ross developed a widely used model of moral behavior that uses a backwards approach of doing things. He begins with moral action, which is somewhat confusing because you would think this would be the concluding step. The ethical action is based on four sub-processes, which are moral sensitivity, moral judgment, moral focus, and moral character. And I'll be talking about them in that order. The first sub-process is moral sensitivity. So we must first recognize the ethical issue at hand. We have to be sensitive to the feelings of others rather than neglecting them, because if we are sensitive to them, it will be easier to recognize the negative actions of certain decisions that are made. Rest states, problem recognition requires that we consider how our behavior affects others, identifying possible courses of action, and determine the consequences of each potential strategy. When searching for these ethical issues, we must ensure that our judgment isn't cloudy and we aren't deceiving ourselves and falling into ethical fading. Johnson brings up steps we can do to enhance our ethical sensitivity, such as active listening, using moral terminology, looking at other perspectives, and refusing to excuse misbehavior. All in all, this step primarily focuses on the importance of how our emotions and sensitivity should be incorporated into recognizing potential ethical issues. As soon as a person develops what they believe is the ethical issue at hand, they can soon select a course of action. Since this is a sub-process which has created the most research, there are two models which Johnson focuses on to be the most important. The cognitive moral development model, which identifies the stages of moral development, and ethical blind spots, which identifies 5 different types of unethical responses. The cognitive moral development, developed by psychologist Lawrence Kohlberg, consists of 3 levels of moral development. The first level, called pre-conventional thinking, focuses on consequences. This level consists of obeying to avoid punishment and focuses on getting a fair deal, which can be exemplified in the phrase, "You help me and I'll help you." The second level, called conventional thinkers, consists of looking for guidance when deciding how to act to determine what direction to take, especially when making decisions. The third level, post-conventional, consists of the most advanced type of ethical reasoning. They're typically concerned with the entire group and want to ensure that universal principles like justice, equality, and human dignity are being addressed and accordingly. Johnson says models of cognitive development provide important insights into the process of ethical decision-making. Ethical blind spots have ideals that unethical choices often result from unconscious distortions. There are 5 biases that determine whether or not we act appropriately. The first bias is overestimating our ethicality, which states that we have an inflated opinion of ourselves. We typically believe that we will do the right things when we are faced with an ethical dilemma. The second bias is forgiving our own ethical behavior. Johnson says we may convince ourselves that the objectionable behavior is morally permissible, and we accept our own wrongdoings as acceptable. The third bias is in-group favoritism. In this bias, we discriminate from people who are different from us. We may forgive shortcomings of others only if we benefit from the decisions that are made. The fourth bias is implicit prejudice. The book states, individuals are not generally aware of their implicit biases, which are based on the human tendency to associate things that generally go together, like thunder and rain or wealthy people and luxury cars. The last ethical blind spot is judging based on outcomes, not the process. This can be exemplified by looking at 2 leaders who follow the same exact process when making a decision, but sometimes we judge them differently based on the results. The third component is moral focus, which tends to focus more on the decisions than the actual decision makers and how they come to that decision. Sometimes individuals want to do the right thing, but their integrity is overpowered somehow when they realize that there's a cost to pay for acting ethically. Both self-interest and hypocrisy are what causes a leader to set their moral principles on the back burner. The book comes up with a good example on page 199 by stating, corporate executives may declare that lower-level employees deserve higher wages. However, whether they really want to help workers or just want to appear as if they do, these executives are not likely to pay employees more if it means that the executives themselves will earn less as a result. In order to increase your moral motivation as well as the moral motivation of followers, it's important to seek out and create ethically rewarding environments. The last component, moral character, is important because executing a plan of decision requires character. Moral agents have to overcome opposition, resist distractions, cope with fatigue, and develop tactics and strategies for reaching their goals. As it turns out, this step primarily focuses on the virtues we discussed in Chapter 3. So I'm going to describe each virtue and how it applies to the moral character. And the following is just a quote taken from Johnson on page 200, and it kind of sums up all the virtues really well. Courage helps leaders implement their plans despite the risks and costs of doing so, while prudence helps them choose the best course of action. Integrity encourages leaders to be true to themselves and to their choices. Humility forces leaders to address limitations that might prevent them from taking action. Reverence promotes self-sacrifice. Optimism equips leaders to persist in the face of obstacles and difficulties. Compassion and justice focuses the attention of leaders on the needs of others rather than on personal priorities. If we follow the character building guidelines in Chapter 3 to build these virtues in order to put the moral decisions made in previous components into action. Johnson says to believe that you are going to have an impact, otherwise you are probably not going to carry through when obstacles surface. So I have a video for you from the show I watched called Scandal. In the video, Olivia is facing a moral obligation. The man in the video is her father, and he works for the White House under a secret CIA force called B613 as an assassin. Olivia is secretly having an affair with the president, and her father feels that the president is taking his daughter away from him. Because of this, he goes to all extremes and creates an order for one of his agents to kill the president's son. And as soon as this occurs, Olivia finds out and she morally has to make a decision. Her dad did something awful, but there's no proof that he did it, meaning that it'd be morally wrong for her to lock him up, because there's no evidence to prove it. She ends up taking matters into her own hands by having some of the people that work for her attempt to kill her own father. And this clip demonstrates her making a decision which she believes is morally permissible. Although murder is nowhere close to being moral, she feels that if he was kept alive and he was not locked up, he would create so many more problems, since he had access to a lot of secret information working under the White House. That means he's probably really capable of doing many unethical things. So here's the video.
Sick, lonely man who only knows how to lie and call it love.
Could you be more ungrateful? You're my flesh. There would be no Olivia Pope if not for me. As difficult as it is to admit, I have failed as a father. And it saddens me because I bled and toiled and allowed myself to be hated, all for your protection, all so that you could believe that you were truly special. But instead of gratitude, I get scorn, ridicule, mockery, and worst of all, a daughter who sends in her clan of good old boys to kill me. Your own blood, every chance you get. It is your life that is sad. It is you who cannot be normal. It is you who have no comprehension of love. So what? Your stomach turns every time you look at me? Well, let me be the one to break it to you, Olivia. You are simply looking in the mirror. You... yourself? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? You, j- you, you just shot your own father. You just shot me.
Okay, so as you can see, her father purposely left the gun out to see if Olivia's intentions on whether or not she'd actually go through with killing him. Previous to this episode, she had gone back and forth between what she wanted to do, and she realized that killing him would be worth it, especially because the president was on board with the idea. This is a very strong decision that she made, and I think it demonstrates the importance of going through the moral components in order to create an ending decision that provides ethical reasoning. So, thanks for listening, and here are my references.